Okay, we're wrapping up July. It's officially over now, Tim. Q&A part 3. I mean, it's over once this video finishes. As soon as this video finishes, no matter where you are in the world, July's done. Write it off, move on. Is that right?
I think that's
how
fair.
it works, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty sure. Pretty sure that's how it works.
We
dictate
see
the
each
months.
month out with part 3.
Pretty sure.
So yeah, if you haven't seen part 1 or 2, hopefully Tim or myself, one of us remembers to put some links down in the comment section or the description so you guys can go back and watch those if you missed them. And yeah, I don't think we don't need to talk about why I'm here and why we're not together and all that stuff. If you want to know, you have to go watch at least the start of part 1 or part 2 to find out. So have I missed anything? Is there anything else we need to say, Tim?
Nah, let's just get into the questions, I reckon.
Today's video sponsor is Thermal Grizzly and their Cryonaut Extreme, which is now available in a 2-gram syringe. This high-performance thermal paste delivers maximum thermal conductivity thanks to an extremely small particle size and layer thickness. It's also very flexible, capable of standing up to sub-zero temperatures for extreme overclocking, but also performs exceptionally well for air and water cooling applications. So if your CPU or GPU needs repasting, then I suggest checking out the Thermal Grizzly range. Link is in the video description.
Alright, crystal ball time. That's always fun.
Ooh.
Do you think DLSS will maintain / become better relative to FSR to justify the extra silicon and engineering efforts on a per game basis? Or do you think it's likely to go the way of G-Sync? So basically, is DLSS going to improve, or is it going to be, outcompeted and become like a FreeSync situation where the more open technology dominates? I think right from the start, I've sort of been saying that I don't really see either of these technologies being the future. If I look like 5 years, get my crystal ball, look 5 years into the future, I think the future is a DLSS-like technology being used in many different game engines, implemented in all sorts of different ways, where, some games may use DLSS, some games may use like Unreal Engine 5's TSR technology. That might be the way to go. And developers may come up with a different temporal upscaling technology. I think that's sort of the future that we'll see, where people will learn the lessons of what DLSS has been able to do. We can use temporal reconstruction, we can use AI, and then there'll be all sorts of things come out. And we've seen this, let's use like Hairworks as an example. We first saw hair simulations come out with Hairworks in games. Looks impressive. But then today, how many games have hair simulations? A fair few, but how many of them use Hairworks? They're all using their own implementations. Game developers come up with their own solution for their own engine. Another developer comes up with their own solution or modifies a solution from another developer. And I think I think we'll see that with these sorts of things. So yeah, I expect DLSS, there'll still be some development efforts. I still expect FSR to have some development efforts as well. But I think they'll just become
that's right.
I think they'll just become one tool that developers can use in their tool chest. There'll be all sorts of different things that developers can pick and choose from that depends on the exact game. Maybe a developer that has less resources to develop that sort of thing will use something like FSR or DLSS, and then developers like Unreal Engine will come up with their own solution because they've got the resources to do it. So yeah, this battle will happen over time and all that sort of thing, and I'm sure DLSS will improve and FSR will improve, and it'll become a big, like a battle between AMD and Nvidia. These companies will want this to become a battle to sell you GPUs. They'll be wanting to make their thing seem better than the other thing, but then over time we'll see what I've been saying, and we'll move on to the next frontier. We've had anti-aliasing, we've had Hairworks, we've had tessellation, we've now got this, and then there'll be something else in the future that people will move on to once that thing is played out like that. At least that's my expectation. Yeah, potentially. I guess it depends on how much R&D they pump into each technology and how it develops and evolves over time. I think ultimately that's a good thing. Like, we definitely don't want DLSS to go away. Like, when I see people talking about, FSR is going to kill off DLSS for reasons, easier to implement, blah, 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 blah. Like, no.
That's not what we want to happen.
No.
Because if that fantasy land was true, AMD's going to be like, okay, we've killed off DLSS. We now don't have to counter that technology anymore. Do you think AMD is going to pump tons of R&D into making FSR better? It's like, we won. That technology sort of goes off to die now, and what Tim's been saying, game engines will take over. Whereas if it becomes sort of a key selling point of either architecture, either current product, then they're both going to be heavily developing that. And that's a win for gamers. We don't really care if it's a win for AMD or Nvidia. We want to see them both putting tons of time and effort into making those technologies better for gamers. So that's how I sort of see that one going. And that's basically my opinion on that. I really don't want either technology to die out. We've already seen by introducing FSR, we've seen Nvidia be much more active in getting it into games and really making it known that they're working hard to get it in games and they're working hard to improve it, and there's more updates coming. And we're seeing that because of FSR, and we're seeing FSR because of DLSS. So
yeah, exactly.
That's how that works.
You always want to see competition in these sorts of things. Part of this question was talking about, for example, will DLSS justify the extra silicon and engineering efforts? I think DLSS, in my opinion, was one technique that did justify, or was an attempt to justify, some of that with Turing, as an example. But over time, what the tensor cores do in NVIDIA's GPU design, AMD's GPUs are starting to have more of those sort of lower level instruction sets also being supported. And yeah, it may not use the exact same instruction sets, but you're going to get a very similar sort of feature implemented into these sorts of GPUs as well. So over time, I think, as we said, we want these technologies to get better and sort of light the torch and carry the torch forward for what things can be done, and to show people, we have got good technologies and we can compete and we can make games looking better and all that sort of thing. But over time, it's going to, the more competition there is, the more features there are available, the less focus there'll be on that particular competition feature, and it'll move into, as I said, sort of the next thing when someone comes up with some sort of monopolistic feature. AMD tried it in the past with Mantle, back when that was their sort of key thing that eventually became Vulkan. And then, NVIDIA's obviously tried it with various different features. And there's always going to be some frontier technology where one company comes up with something that isn't supported at all on the other one, and then new battle starts between those two things. So yeah, I think what we're talking about is probably, at least what I'm talking about, is quite a way in the future. I'm not expecting there to be each engine using their own technology within the next year or two, but it tends to sort of be the way that it goes. And yeah, it's good to see these sorts of developments happen and push the technology forward, because without competition, you just get stagnation, which I guess has happened on the hardware side at times, and that's not what we want to see.
There's been an influx of 3070 Ti/3080 Ti GPUs, but the difference in price between some manufacturers is more than 50%. Some are cheaper and better than more expensive ones. Looking better at the same time, is there any reason why some manufacturers put immense prices on crappy GPUs? So I guess this question is asking just why are we seeing price differences between various brands? And I guess the region this guy's in, a 3070 Ti from ASUS can be 50% more than one from MSI, as a non-specific example, but just putting in some names there. We've certainly seen some AIBs jack up their prices, like their actual MSRP prices, more than others for whatever reason. Maybe they think they can cash in more on their brand, or maybe their manufacturing costs and shipping and stuff have genuinely gone up more than others for reasons unknown to me at this time. So there can be some real reasons for why we're seeing a price discrepancy, but I think most of it is probably just brands trying to cash in on their brand image. Like we've seen ASUS do that, number of price hikes from them. I know in Australia their pricing is hideous compared to some of their competitors, but they can get away with it because their competitors don't have stock. So gamers who want a GPU don't have a choice. I think during more normal times, they're fairly competitive. Like you might see some premium products where the margins blow out a bit, like your sort of high-end Strix cards and things like that. And we've made this content before. I can't remember whether it was RTX 2060s where we compared, I think it might have been the MSI Ventus model to the Gaming X or something like that. Many years ago now, and performance is the same, as in FPS performance. Might be a bit of difference in temperature and operating volume, slightly better with the more premium cooler. But generally, the really premium products like the Gaming X Trios, the high-end Strix cards, they're really not worth buying in terms of cost per frame, in terms of value.
And there can be some differences in the way the cards are distributed as well. So not always just the one brand setting a higher MSRP than the other. Not as much of an issue in the United States, where a lot of them can be, direct sales and that sort of thing. But certainly in Australia, different brands have notably different distribution models, where, especially when we're in this situation where there's bundling and all that sort of stuff. One brand might be bundling with a certain range of products, and then another brand,
that's a good point,
is not bundling at all. They're just jacking up the prices, and that could cause differences in the prices that retailers are actually able to offer you, even if their MSRPs are very similar at the end of the day. So
some retailers, for example, like selling RX 6800s, just as a sole example, they may get directly from the manufacturers. They may be a manufacturer partner. So they get a good price. That's what you're saying. And then another brand, they have to go through the local distributor, which puts on their 20% or whatever it may
probably
be.
50%
and then
at this point.
I just put out a more general or a kinder number there for distributors. But anyway, that can be another reason for why you do see in certain regions. And again, that will be region specific. So yeah, and also retailer specific as well. Some retailers may be competitive, better on certain brands than other retailers because they have that sort of exclusive deal or whatever it may be.
All right, next question. Steve and Tim, what do you usually do with the GPUs you put in your personal PCs? Do you run them at stock? Do you raise the power limit? Do you overclock or undervolt them? So no, none of that's, well, I've run it at stock. None of the other stuff, no raising power limits, no overclocking or undervolting them. The reason for that is that my main PC, which is a production and gaming system, obviously has the production part there, which means that I can't risk stability issues. And stability issues are very frustrating if I'm like in the middle of editing a video or something like that, and then I get a crash, or Premiere crashes or the system crashes. I don't want that to happen. That's very frustrating. I lose time that I've been working. And even if it does crash, I don't want that to be attributable to things like overclocks. If it does crash, I want that to be because the software sucks more than, was that the software, or was that the hardware that I've tried to overclock and push it beyond its limits where it's not supposed to. So just for me, and again, we've talked about this plenty of times before, but the performance increase you get from overclocking most of these products is minimal. So it makes that doesn't take away from the stability problems that we may run into. I assume it's very similar for you, that you run everything stock.
Look, my answer's almost identical to yours. Well, it really is for the most part. Another reason would be the fact that I do, probably more so than you, but I do tend to change the GPU I'm using fairly regularly. So fine-tuning it and working out how it works best in the system isn't really something I'm that interested in, because, next week I could change that out for something else because, I don't know, there's a reason why I'm testing that, maybe a driver bug or something. I want to see if it crashes in my system. And just also, it's a lot of messing around to risk stability for very, very little reward. So I think back, I was trying to think about this. I'm like, was it because I was younger and I was more willing to mess around with stuff, and now I'm just can't be bothered anymore? That may be part of it. I think that also ties in the fact that I'm using it professionally now, whereas I used to just play video games. So if it crashed, it was like, that was annoying, but it was just, it was annoying in the sense that it crashed while you were playing a game, not that you were doing important work that you're maybe working on a deadline and you couldn't afford to have that happen. But also back then you could overclock your GPU or maybe get 20% more performance. Now you do it and it's like, can you get 10% more out of it? Maybe. But that's sort of the most you're hoping to achieve there. So it's not really worth it. With the advances in monitor capabilities over the years, what would you do with a former high-end monitor model if you still had one? So, for example, like, are we talking about like my Dell 30-inch that I had, I spent like $2,500 on?
Yeah, you spend thousands of dollars and then you want to upgrade what you do with the old one.
You can use it in a secondary system or give it to a friend or something like that. I mean, I think my one I could sell on eBay for $300 to $500 if I wanted to. I've put it on the shelf. It's actually behind me in the storage area.
Yeah, those are the sort of things I would do. Like move it to a second monitor. Like in a lot of setups, you typically have like your good monitor, and then you have like a second monitor that is worse because you don't need your second monitor to be amazing. And then if you upgrade your main one, you might want to move your former high-end model off to the side and replace the crappier model that you used to be using for a second monitor, or maybe you've never used a second monitor, so now you have two. You can experiment with stuff like that, or yeah, as you said, sell it on eBay, give it to a friend, that sort of thing. And generally monitors that are good quality and have lasted a while, you know, the value isn't going, like if you'd bought like a PG 279Q, which was like a high-end Asus 1440p 140 Hz monitor, one of the very first models that came out with that sort of technology in it, you can still get a reasonable amount for that monitor, because you know you're not going to be selling it in 1080p pricing. You're still going to get 1440p sort of pricing for your display. So those are the sorts of things that, yeah, buying a high-end monitor can be beneficial for you. And yeah, even if you upgrade in the future, there's still a lot of useful things for it. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the answer is specific to high-end monitors, and I don't even think it's really specific to monitors. It's like
exactly.
The same rules apply to a GPU, for example, or pretty much any other product that has some kind of value. It's like, can it be repurposed or reused by you? Is it still of utility to you, or is it not? And it's just going to collect dust like my Dell 30-inch monitor, and in that case you're probably better off selling it. I just kept mine because I don't know, I thought maybe it'd be handy, and then it turns out Tim gave me a whole heap of monitors and I'm probably never going to use it ever again.
All right, Steve and Tim, crystal ball time. What will be the name of Alder Lake CPU lines? I'm thinking a mix of Ice Lake naming, example Intel Core i5-1035G7 and Intel Core i5-1030G4. So my guess is something like
please no.
i9-12B8L8G1 or i9-12-881. Yeah, those are good suggestions. I think you're pretty close to on the money for some of the mobile names in particular. I'm expecting, you know, Core i7,
horrific names,
1285-63G8 and all that stuff. I think the rumors are suggesting that we're still going to get like 12900K and that sort of thing, which will make your life a lot easier with the Alder Lake desktop parts. But for some reason, the people that do the reasonably sensible desktop naming, when it comes to the mobile parts, they just lose their minds. They're just like numbers and letters. This is my time to shine. I can put as many numbers and letters in there as I want, and they just go to town. So yeah, I'll be stuck with that, I think. All right, next question. Why does it take so long for lower-end graphics cards to be produced or even announced? Been waiting for the RTX 3050 to replace my 3-year-old GT 1030. I think we used to see a much closer cadence between the high-end and the low-end products, but then they realized over time that, you know, they want to see people buy high-end products as much as possible, so they want to push those first. And once that market's, you know, saturated, people, all their FOMO has been satisfied and people have rushed out to buy the high-end products that they don't necessarily need, then they release the next lower product and do that again with a whole new market. And then when that's done, they do it again and again and again, as opposed to in previous years where you used to see much more of a stack launch all at once, and then people would just rush for like the $200 or $300 products. These days, it's all about, you know, the marketing and trying to drive you up the high end and trying to make you feel like, yeah, oh, you spent $500 last year. Well, you need to spend $800 this year. So that's why I think we start to see these sort of longer cadences between release. There's nothing stopping them from releasing an RTX 3050 right now. I mean, maybe there'll be some volume issues for memory and substrates in the current situation, but in normal times, there's no issue whatsoever. Like, they could launch it first if they wanted to. It's all about the market.
I mean, they could launch it. Yeah, they could launch it first if they wanted to, but you know, for reasons that you've touched on and other obvious reasons, you lead with your best foot forward, your flagship product, or very near to your flagship product. Maybe sometimes for marketing purposes, it makes sense to leave a bit more in reserve. But I think there's also logistical reasons there as well. Even in the past, we've never seen them. Just even when there was, say, I don't know, 5 GPUs that made up a family, they never just dumped them all out at once. You got at most 2, maybe. I don't know. I'm trying to recall last time there was sort of 3. But yeah, it's usually 2 together, and then there'll be a trickle on sort of thing where you get 1 every month. And I think we would have seen that even this time. There's obviously more GPUs typically in a family that make up a GPU family, and you might see them released over a 6-month period. But
yeah,
for reasons that...
And there are some aspects of these cards as well that, you know, a lot of the time they're designed for new technologies, you know, using the new GDDR memory and using the new process nodes, which, yeah, you might be able to sell those products at a high-end price at the beginning, you still want to wait for, for releasing your mid-range cards when, the yields are a little bit better on the process technology, or the wafers are a little bit cheaper, or the memory's a little bit cheaper. So then, you can make that lower end card be in the affordable price point that you want it to be in, which might not be as possible straight at launch when, the first month's shipment of GDDR6X memory is like way more expensive than it would be in the following month. So there's all those sorts of considerations as well.
That's right. There's heaps of reasons. As I was saying, logistical stuff, like it's probably pretty hard for an AIB to launch 6-7 new graphics cards at once, ship all of those, get all the packaging and everything. And also, I would imagine there'd be, take Pascal, for example, there would have been significantly more GTX 1060s in warehouses and at retail stores sitting there opposed to, like, I don't know, 1080s and 1080 Ti's. So by filtering down, it gives them a chance to move that inventory before the next wave of mainstream cards, for example, come in. So anyway, a whole heap of reasons there. Probably covered that one pretty well, hopefully.
Okay, I think this is a question for Steve. I showed my girlfriend some of the Shed footage and she asked, "Oh, it doesn't have Windows. Does he prefer Apple?" Well, does Steve prefer Apple? Seems kind of shilly to me.
I don't know how to answer that question. Do I explain why the Shed doesn't have Windows, or do I just laugh and shake my head at the dad joke that apparently your girlfriend made?
It is.
It's a problem. It's a worry when your girlfriend's making dad jokes, I would have thought.
It's the sort of joke I think you would make from time to time. If you came over to my place and saw I had you'd ask me if I was some sort of Apple fan.
Not only would I make that joke, but I would then proceed to laugh at that dad joke that was really lame while Tim just shakes his head in disapproval, and I think I'm the funniest person that ever walked on the planet.
Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds right. I'm familiar with that.
That's how those interactions typically go with Tim. The looks Tim gives me sometimes.
You are a dad joke
do I
fan.
need to say anything more about that? I don't know. Do I need to explain why there isn't any Windows for the girlfriend, or was she just... Was she somewhat curious, or was she just trying to make a Apple versus PC related joke in there somehow? I don't know.
Let's just move on.
Sure. Tim, it's not addressed to you, but I just said Tim. Are you surprised at the level of interest in FSR? It seems to be generating more buzz than I've seen in the community in quite a while. Really? Every time AMD releases a new product, it seems to sort of go this way.
Yeah, anything really.
I guess just with... we've been saying DLSS has become a really important feature, a really key feature that AMD desperately needs to counter, because it was getting pretty difficult to recommend their GPUs because of the threat from DLSS. So I guess that's why the AMD community in particular was really hoping FSR would be quite something.
Yeah, I think it comes from... I think there's two groups of people I think have generated a lot of the interest and excitement in FSR. And the first one is what you have been saying, like the AMD community obviously is wanted a competitor for DLSS. But I think there's as well just the general non-fanboy, reasonable people out there that are interested in the tech market as a whole. We like to see competition in any front, like whether it's AMD versus Intel CPUs or AMD versus Nvidia GPUs or features like this. There are people out there, I know it's hard to believe because they tend to not be as vocal as the fanboy people, but there are people that enjoy the competition and the battle between seeing what's the next Intel processor going to be like, what's the next AMD processor going to be like, how's that going to compete, what are the dynamics there. And when you have a market where one company has been super dominant and one company has effectively a feature that hasn't been countered yet, you're always waiting for what's the counter going to be. So even if they're not necessarily a fanboy, I think that's generated a lot of interest in sort of how are these two companies going to come at each other and compete in sort of like a neutral observer battle sense. At least that's where I've found the interest in this sort of thing, is not necessarily, wanting one tech to succeed or the other. I'm very interested to see what each company is doing with one tech or the other and how they go about competing with one another. And I think that's generated a lot of interest. And the end result is, DLSS gets better. FSR comes out and offers things to gamers that can't access DLSS, and that's great for everyone. And hopefully we see more of that, and we can talk more about future DLSS, future FSR, and there'll be even more interest and even more buzz when those technologies come out. So yeah, it's good to see people come on board and get interested in these sorts of things that I didn't think would be, as exciting as the performance stuff that you've talked about in your general reviews. It seems like some of these features are generating just as much interest in the community, which is great.
I think another reason for that is the way that AMD announced it played a huge role in that.
Yeah,
because
the marketing.
Obviously, people, there'd been some interviews and stuff done where it sounded like FSR wasn't really ready for prime time anytime soon. They were sort of talking about this year. We were probably thinking even at this stage, had it not been released yet, 2, 3, 4 months away.
Yep,
and we still weren't really that confident with what we would be getting at that point in time. And then for their Computex announcement, they just come out and say, yeah, we've got this FSR, it's coming next month. And I think what really blew the lid off it was the fact that, hey, this works on pretty much all GPUs. I mean, they didn't exactly say it at the time, but, it works on our competitors' GeForce GPUs. Here's how it works on a 1060. And I think that's when people really started paying attention and were kind of blown away that the potentially you get a DLSS-like feature that works on GeForce GPUs as well as Radeon GPUs. That was quite incredible.
Yeah, and I think the interest has then been fueled since then, since we've had the first evaluations of it, is that it's not it's not terrible. Like, I think some people, obviously there's a crowd of people always with these features of anything that was expecting it to be quite bad. And I still, as I talked about in my more recent video, I still think that DLSS is the superior technology, but its FSR gets close enough in some situations that again helps generate that interest and excitement. Because if it was a feature that worked on all GPUs but it sucked, then no one would care at all about it. But the fact that it is worth using in some situations, I think, is continuing to keep people excited about it. And again, we saw all of this back when DLSS 2.0 came out, and it completely changed the way that it worked versus DLSS 1.0, and there's a lot of interest and excitement back then as well. So hopefully the next feature iteration in this sort of battle keeps up that excitement, because I enjoy making those videos and going deep and talking to everyone about them. So hopefully there's more of that to come. All right, next question. Will CPU scaling play a part in FSR frame time performance? Will older CPUs result in a much worse performance than, say, the same GPU with a more modern CPU? So I think you'll have a bit to talk about this as well, but I guess this comes from the fact that FSR and DLSS as well lower the render resolution of the game, which obviously makes, when you get higher frame rates, as a result, you're also putting more strain on the CPU. So for older CPUs, that's going to be more problematic if they're not able to run at a acceptable performance level. But
it depends on, again, how useful. We've sort of touched on this before, and subjective opinions will vary. I personally am not super impressed with FSR at 1080p. 1440p, quite good. 4K, excellent. That's my simplistic take on it, my generalization across all the games we've seen so far. So in that sense, not really going to matter, because I think you'd be really using FSR more when you're very heavily GPU bound to try and improve your frame rates.
Yeah, that's right.
You won't be using FSR to improve frame rates when the CPU's the performance limiting component. If you're CPU bound, which is really what this question is asking, in a CPU bound scenario, FSR has nothing to offer you at all. It doesn't lessen the CPU load, and therefore it will not improve performance.
Yeah, you should actually go the other way.
Scenario,
you should raise the resolution.
It's basically degrading image quality at no performance boost. That's what you're doing there. So in that situation, the only way you can really improve anything is to improve visual quality to the point where it doesn't drop frame rate and find where that is. And that's what we're seeing in Dota 2, for example, which is why FSR was not really suitable for Dota 2 for virtually all hardware configurations.
Yeah, I think the only reason why your CPU would matter for these sorts of FSR or at the same time, DLSS discussions is if you were running GPU limited, but then you turn on DLSS and you become CPU limited, which may be the case. For example, you're playing at 1440p and you're running FSR, and then you're running at 1080p, and because you were using a Ryzen 5 1600 instead of a more modern processor, then at 1080p you might be performance limited, where it may, again, this is going to be very configuration dependent. You may not be as CPU limited at 1440p, which is somewhat of a concern, but again,
you have to work it out for yourself. It's like, I'm getting 4% more frames. and the image quality is slightly worse. So it's in that sense, it's probably like, I probably wouldn't bother. And so you got to measure the performance gains versus the image quality trade-off. And
I think the 1080p performance data that you provide is going to give everything that you need to know, because I wouldn't recommend DLSS or FSR with render resolutions below 1080p for most of the time, or at very least like only slightly below 1080p would be acceptable. So it's not like we really need 720p benchmarks or 540p benchmarks to know what's going to happen with FSR or DLSS. I think for the most part the 1080p data is going to be important, and if you are considering using a 1440p FSR quality mode, or even like a 4K, DLSS performance, which I wouldn't necessarily use, but some people do, then again, I think your 1080p data is going to give you everything that you need to know about that. And if you've got a lower end CPU, then you might consider upgrading based on that. But very configuration dependent. Hey, I think this question has been answered before, but can't find it, and Google wasn't much help. Well, hopefully we can come to the rescue, but maybe not.
I'll just say on that note, sorry to interrupt you, this is where actually adding the timestamps to the Q&A has been very beneficial, is actually finding previous questions. And also why our sister channel, Hub Clips, is also extremely useful, because the question's the title. So for those of you who don't know, we do have another, it's only a few months old now, but we segment the Q&As and upload the questions as individual videos. So
some people
perhaps
prefer
you
that
watch
format.
a Q&A. Yeah, it's just interesting. So anyway, but sorry to interrupt, Tim. Continue.
No, it's good. Hub Clips is good. Good shout out. Good to integrate that into our videos. Go subscribe to Hub Clips if you prefer, the more individual video format for the segments that we do in the larger Q&As. Anyway, so the question this guy is asking that he couldn't answer on Google.
Okay.
Does other areas of my motherboard need more direct cooling if I have a monoblock and a GPU water block too? Like, for example, the chipset or audio. Does that need to be cooling? So I assume this question asker's got, obviously they've got a monoblock on their motherboard, but if they have a very low airflow situation, is that going to be a problem for the chipset? I assume the chipset would be the primary consideration there, but what do you think? Is that important to have direct airflow over those components?
Yeah, I generally I would say no. Obviously we've seen like X570 chipsets where they do require a bit of cooling, because they generate a bit more, or they use a bit more power, generate a bit more heat than traditional chipsets. But generally no. I mean, the motherboard is designed to work in a whole range of different environments, so I doubt you're throwing anything that it wasn't designed for. Their audio, definitely not. The only other thing that maybe chucks out a bit of power on boards is like 10 gigabit networking. Generally, again, they have their own little heatsink though that takes care of that, and if you're not using it, then that's not going to matter anyway. But I wouldn't worry about that. So usually with the systems, it's obviously CPU, graphics card, and then the next thing in line would be your VRM. But extreme overclockers, guys like BuildZoid, will probably tell you that monoblocks are dumb, because generally people put monoblocks on really high-end motherboards that don't need any cooling. Like, think of your MSI Godlikes, your Aorus Extremes. You can run those things without heat sinks and overclock the latest and greatest CPUs, and they'll still run at relatively cool temperatures. But you've got the monoblock there, so if you're not having to change your CPU regularly, then it's probably not a big deal, and people like them because they look cool. So there's that.
Fair enough.
If you're getting into the liquid cooling, you're not. I mean, at what point do you not really care about practicality if you're going liquid cooling, especially if it's hard tube cooling? It's like, hey, you might as well make it look cool, I guess.
Yeah,
that seems to be more of the sort of intention there, is to make a cool looking system rather than a cool system, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
I got nothing else to add to that, really.
All right, and that pretty much does it for part 3 of the July 2021 Q&A series. As we said at the start of this video, we dictate when the months start and end. So, we're at the end of the month. You can go relax. It's August coming up straight after this, pretty much. Great range of questions. I think we had some pretty good discussions in there, as always. Thanks to everyone who does submit questions on the YouTube community tab or goes into our Discord community. If you are a member, we've got a little Q&A section there where you can ask us questions, and we'll eventually get to it. It's not the quickest process if you ask them right at the start of the month, because you have to wait like 4 weeks before we answer your question. But people are patient. People still appreciate it anyway. And Discord community is a great place to be if you're yeah, if you're not already signed up and are a member. So links to that in the description below. Hardware unavailable merch as well. That is still available. If you're part of the 20% club and you're watching at this point, you might be interested in getting some of this merch, which is still around. I think it looks pretty good. So
That's so good.
yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Anything else to say?
Yeah. No, that's it. Yeah, another month down and move on to the next month. Some new products to look at next month, so that should be quite interesting.
Nice. Yeah, good.
A lot of work for me, but yeah, other than that, good stuff. Thank you to everyone who asks questions, watches the videos, supports the channel. We love it.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim. See you
See you next time.